Okay, everyone, welcome to this session. My name is Grigg and I'm the chair for this session, and welcome also to the online audience. And please put your questions through either while the speaker is speaking or in the question time afterwards. So I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who will be Professor George Richardson. Pardon? I've already said I'm Grigg. So it's O'Leary Professor of Public Administration and Policy at the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy at the University of Albany. Now, George Richardson is very experienced in computer modelling for policy analysis and group decision support, and he's been honoured with awards from all over the place. The State University of New York for excellence in teaching, excellence in academic service, and most recently the System Dynamics Society recognised him for, with its award for outstanding service for contributions to the society in the field. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you, George. Thank you very much.
I'll use the Gabrielle honorary platform here that's hiding behind. I was telling others that it reminds me of the advice to giving a talk, you know, stand up so you all can see me, speak up so you all can hear me, and shut up so you all will like me. But that'll happen in 20 minutes, I guess. Unlike a lot of the other talks, I'm not going to talk about how we do system dynamics modeling with groups. I'm going to do that tomorrow in the workshop. Gabrielle and I thought that maybe it would be best if I showed you examples of system dynamics work that has had impacts of various sorts. But I do want to say, as far as methodology goes, that the talks by Gerald Midgley and John Young and Beth Fulton describe processes that are extraordinarily like what we do, and I feel very much at home being in that context. So let's get on with it. I'll chat about 4 examples of work in our field: commodity cycles, project dynamics, urban dynamics, epidemics, and say something at the end about what actually generates impact. Commodity cycles are an extraordinarily important dynamic phenomenon around the world. There are instabilities in commodities worldwide, and prices in particular. Here's peanuts. Here's a Gambia peanut farmer, and some reference from the web wondering about whether the peanut farming can bounce back. Here's aluminum. Here's artisanal mining of mineral compounds. An estimated 20 million men, women, and children worldwide engage in artisanal and small-scale mining. And you can imagine that instabilities in price and income are crushing and devastating to all sorts of folks around the world. Here's coffee. And here's a simple commodity model. I'll take you through it. I won't do this for all of them, but this little picture is supposed to suggest that an inventory of whatever the commodity is like a tub. And producing things flow into the tub, down a pipe, and shipping things flow out of the tub in another pipe. That's the picture you're supposed to have in your head. It's bathtub thinking. That's exactly what it is. And producing, well, production comes from production capacity. We ship if we've got orders if we've got demand. Production capacity in this theory of commodity cycles comes online after some delay. So there's capacity in construction. For peanuts, it's planting more fields of peanut-producing plants. And of course, there's feedback loops that are crucial to the dynamics of such a system. This simply says if you got enough inventory, you'll ship. If you don't have enough inventory, you'll cut back. And if inventory coverage is low, you will try to plan for growth in capacity. I should say, by the way, that the first commodity models were done by Dennis Meadows in our field back in the early 1970s. It turned out to be his dissertation. Dennis Meadows is much more widely known as the leader of the research effort known as The Limits to Growth, and one of the principal authors of that book. Now this is a tiny model. Most people would say it's way too small to think about the real world, but it does behave nicely. Here's what it does if you jar it. It starts to oscillate over time, showing distinct oscillatory patterns that are a lot like instabilities, not quite like the ones that you saw in those real-world graphs, but it has this unstable character. And it has one of those features that you just, this is the reason why people build dynamic models of complex systems. If you just jiggle the orders, if you just randomly rattle them, the system tends to oscillate with its own preferred frequency. It's a little bit like if you tap your guitar, the guitar strings will hum with their natural frequency. That's what this thing is doing. Of course, you can build a much more sophisticated commodity model. This comes from my wonderful friend John Sturman at MIT. Much more sophisticated, but we still got inventories and capacity, and we've still got all kinds of stuff. John has tons of things about trader prices and so on, because commodity pricing is a big deal in the dynamics of international commodities. And there's demand, and you would check in through here if we went through the details, and you'd see long-run prices and short-run expected prices and actual prices and traders' prices and growers' prices, and lots of detail. And it behaves the same way that little structure behaves. One would use such a model to begin to look at policies that might stabilize such global oscillations, or if the similar oscillations occur within a confined space, like a commodity that is unique to Australia, then you would be working on policies that would stabilize these. I'm not going to try to talk about that. Project dynamics, my second big area of application in the system dynamics field. It's probably the most studied dynamic phenomenon in our field. Our field began about 1960. Famous overruns. You'll recognize two of your own, Sydney Olympic Park and the Sydney Opera House. But Canada has a bunch of theirs, Japan has one, Malaysia has a bunch. And I got these, by the way, by just going to the web and saying cost overruns. And you get taken to pages that have this stuff. It's really quite wonderful. And down at the bottom, that's a picture of the Airbus being moved from one place to another. Overruns are a big problem in large projects. Overruns in cost, overruns in people, overruns in materials, and overruns in time. And there are people in this room, I believe, who make this the study of such project management issues their life's work. It's an area of major application in our field. So here's an example of a small model of project dynamics. There's a workforce that works on the project, and you accumulate the person months of effort on the project. And there's a nice little feedback loop that says, do we need more workers? And if we do, we hire them, and this loop should do the job. Those workers make progress, and they reduce the tasks remaining and contribute to cumulative actual progress. And you can use that information to tell you how productive the workers are, and that helps you figure out the number of person months of effort remaining. And you can use the number of person months of effort remaining to tell you whether you need to slip the schedule or not. And so there's an endogenous component in this little structure for slipping the schedule. Or, well, that's what happens in complex projects, but yeah, I suppose you could shorten the schedule as well. And if this were all there were in complex projects, there wouldn't be a problem. So we need a hypothesis about why they get into trouble. And there's a whole bunch of hypotheses about why projects get into trouble. I'm going to give you two. That one right there, the one that's called Undiscovered Rework. People do things on a project that will turn out later to be perceived as flawed or requiring rework. And the concept of undiscovered rework is absolutely central to the management of complex projects. Sometimes, of course, people say, well, we just had the wrong project definition. That's what the other circle was. But the really interesting one is undiscovered rework. And in this little tiny model, you can, with these notions, generate the kinds of tasks that you see. This particular model was supposed to produce a project that would complete itself in 40 months. It would hire about 30 people to do the job, and there's a distinction between what people think they're doing, that's perceived progress, and what people are actually doing, that's real progress. And there's undiscovered rework, which is really the difference between the two. And the great picture here is the blue curve for the workforce. They hire the number of the people they want, and pretty early on they realize they don't have enough people, and so they have to hire more, and they get to a place where the workforce plateaus. And if you've managed projects, you know why that occurs. You think you're done, or you think you're almost done, so you don't want to bring on new people because you'll just have to train them. So you stop doing that, and yet you have another couple years of this project to go before you've actually finished. Now, of course, this is a pedagogical model. It's a model I use in my classes to teach about project dynamics and to teach about model construction. So it's, you would say, tiny, and in that sense, potentially unrealistic. But it does capture the core structure and dynamics of project overruns. And in one of the things that I'll chat about much more tomorrow in that lunchtime workshop, these dynamics are not imposed upon the model from without. It's the interactions of workforce, schedule, tasks, cumulative perceived progress, effort perceived remaining, undiscovered rework, the way those things interact that are generating these dynamics. There's no magic from the outside, it's endogenous. And here is a tiny, tiny list of impactful project modeling in our field. The first great case was the Lytton Industry case, in which the Navy sued Lytton for $500 million because of the big cost overrun in a ship in the project. So Lytton sued the Navy, and they went back and forth, and a system dynamics model was built to adjudicate. System dynamics models have been used for overruns on the Channel Tunnel, and lots more. Urban dynamics. Many of you may know about this because it's a classic written by the founder of our field. What you may not realize is that actually all cities, all major mature cities in the United States, show a particular pattern of growth, and it turns out to be similar in other parts of the world. I don't know about Australia. But there's a growth phase, there's a plateauing phase, and there's a decline phase. These happen to be population curves. Here's 12 more cities in the United States that show exactly the same phenomenon. And systems thinkers would want to know, why the heck is that happening to all these very different cities? And this is what urban decay looks like in central cities. Forrester's city was sitting on a limitless plane because he said he didn't want the external environment to influence what was going on in the city. He wanted to derive urban dynamics from policies within the city. So here's a baby little model: business structures, housing, and population. Again, this is a model from my classes. If you just have business structures, they grow up and fill up the land, and it looks like that. If you add people, and jobs and labor and so on, it grows similarly, S-shaped. If you add places for people to live and housing density and so on, then it does something very interesting. This little baby model exhibits urban growth, urban stagnation, and urban decay. And it also shows that blue curve, labor to job ratio. This little tiny model shows what real cities do. In the growth phase, it's a wonderful place to be a worker because there's a lot of jobs. So the labor to job ratio is low, wages are high. And in this phase that's the transition between growth and saturation, the labor to job ratio switches dramatically. And we wind up with a city with 18, 20, 30% unemployment in the central city. This little tiny model, it does that endogenously, and you'd like to know why. The major urban dynamics model had not 3 stocks but 9 stocks, and but it showed the similar behavior. You can play around with some wonderful little parameters in the model to begin to try to understand what it's doing. And here's an example. If we increased low-cost housing in our city, which, by the way, is what we did in the United States in the decade of urban decay, population in the new run is the blue curve. Looks almost like the old one. Business structures in the new policy is the blue curve. And housing and the labor to job ratio is, if anything, the same. Little impact, no improvement. Wildly successful job program. You go in there and you just say, we're going to have 25% more jobs per business structure. Yeah, you get more people, and things are better for a little while, but the effect goes away. This is why you want to study natural feedback systems, because they're going to compensate for your favorite policies, and we have to understand compensating feedback. Housing demolition, actually it makes things better. And oh, you say 3 and I say 428. Who should I believe? Okay, I'm going to believe this one. And in this little simple model, it is possible to get rid of urban decay. And I'm not going to tell you how you do that. That would be later that we would do that sort of thing. But you would be experimenting with this to understand the policies that prevent urban decay and can improve long-run employment. Modeling the spread of diseases is the last one I'll chat about. Lots of people in the room have built little models of epidemics. What I really want to focus on is the eradicating polio worldwide, and I want to end with a slide about that. The core structure of infectious diseases are susceptible people and sick people, and they generate a rising epidemic. You can quarantine people. You can immunize people, and you can look at the effects of those various policies. This particular simulation model happens to be about influenza, and there's a period where you're symptomatic but you're not showing symptoms, so quarantining doesn't do much good. Eradication of polio worldwide is where I really want to get to. Kimberly Thompson and her colleagues have been studying the phenomenon of poliomyelitis for years. They won the Forrester Award from the System Dynamics Society in 2008. And what they've really done is to persuade the World Health Organization to change its global policy, global polio strategy from containing outbreaks to eradication. At the time, they were just about with their conclusions about things. The New England Journal of Medicine had an editorial that said, constraining is the best you can do. You can't eradicate it worldwide. And then Kimberly Thompson and her colleagues went to the World Health Organization, showed them their work, and convinced them that, in fact, they should eradicate it worldwide, which is what they're doing, and the Gates Foundation is helping to fund that effort. The other thing Kimberly Thompson is famous for, she's a risk and decision risk communication kind of person, and she's written an entire book of cartoons on decision and risk, which I think is great. She says downplaying the model played a key role in the results of decision makers. Here's what CDC views health these days. They are taking a stock and flow view of such things. And there are many more, of course. Now, I'm done, actually, right? I'm beyond time? Or do I have my 1 minute left?
You can have one more minute.
Okay, cool. More impacts. What creates it? Significant problem. You know this more than I do. Significant problem, clear, dynamic problem definition. The one key phrase there that hasn't popped up necessarily in other statements that folks have been making is the word dynamic. Stakeholder involvement. Everything we do is based in a stakeholder involvement world. Multiple perspectives. You've been seeing that in all the talks that have been given. Requisite modeling, what's necessary and no more. Large models for confidence, small models like the ones I've shown you for understanding the model are usually built small to large, and the audience usually loves to see large. But eventually they get convinced that their understanding will come from small models. And powerful, insightful, sensitive, inquiring communication is crucial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful, and I like how it resonated with what Beth was saying yesterday as well about the value of what she called toy models that really do capture so much.
I try not to say toy models because I always think the little ones really can teach us a lot.
Yes, yeah.
So small or tiny, but yeah, never toy.
She mentioned that as well, that we often don't like using that word. So,
Yeah.
Okay, are there any questions? Yes? Okay, an online one first. All right, and sorry, I should have introduced Caroline, who is our online moderator. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you. I'm just going to start off by welcoming someone who's finally joined Twitter today, especially to link in with our online network, and they got fully into the spirit of the talks today, and their name is Mysterious Networker. So I like that. Anyway, we have a comment from Julie Thompson-Klein, and she says, "You're a wonderful teacher. Thank you so much for a rich talk. In the spirit of this meeting, what advice do you have for transdisciplinarians to think about the topics you have raised in a new common, say, I2S discipline?" As a polio survivor, by the way, so she appreciated what you were saying about that example.
Well, I'm new to your community. I'm new to the community of folks who talk about transdisciplinary work. I feel like the fellow who discovered that he has been speaking prose all his life. There's an enormous amount of the way we do our work which appears to fall properly under the label of what people are referring to as transdisciplinary. I'll say more about it tomorrow, but the models that we build in the public sector, we build with groups of practitioners, groups of stakeholders. So we put people in the room who will eventually implement. Actually, that's the wrong way to say that. They put us in the room. They invite us into the room because they've got a problem they have to work on. We work on making sure that we've got the right stakeholders in the room, and the models that become constructed emerge from the group. So a lot of what we do in building formal models, you would say, are something like, and it's an emergent group process, a lot more about group process perhaps than about modeling. And I'm sensing, as I'm listening to people talk here, that engaging the stakeholders is absolutely critical. In fact, we've found in our work that if we carry out a lot of modeling work and then later carry it to the stakeholders and say, let's tell you the wonderful things we've found, that they don't believe you, and they have no reason to. So we would be engaging people early on. Kimberly Thompson engaged people early on, but she did not engage the World Health Organization. So her communication at that high level was based upon not only her modeling work, but her genius. She is astonishing in her ability to communicate risk and policy. And lacking her genius, I think engaging the stakeholders is the only path. I hope I answered that question.
All right, thank you.
You gave me a chance to say something I wanted to say anyway, so.
Okay, there's a question here.
Liz Bolton from the ANU, Fenner School. Actually, you answered my question, but my question was, it would seem to me that the magic and the potential of these models is only realised in the difficult part is what goes in the models, and, you know, particularly thinking about unknowns and how do you capture those. And I guess I was interested in how you ensure that you've got everything accounted for in the model. But I guess you've just described that, but perhaps...
Well, there's more to say about that.
Okay, sure, great.
Do you want me to try?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, is there... In these group processes, are there particular ways of stimulating people to try and think outside the box that you use?
Yes.
Yep.
There were two questions in there. So getting people to think outside the box. It is common that in the work that we do, people are not thinking about things over time. They are thinking about policy in either an extremely short run, or they're not thinking about the run at all. They're looking at what's bad and what they'd like to do to make it better. So one of the earliest things we do, it's an utterly trivial thing to do, really, with a group of folks, but extraordinarily powerful, is to give pieces of paper to people with axes on them and ask them to draw graphs over time of what they're concerned about. And we don't tell them what the time frame is. That emerges. We don't tell them what variables to graph. We don't even use the word variable. We used to ask people for lists of variables, and they'd write all sorts of things that weren't numbers. So we stopped doing that. We just ask for graphs over time. And you get this rich array out of a group of maybe 10 folks. You can get 60 graphs over time of what they're concerned about. And in those graphs are the issues that they're concerned about. And you can begin to link them together because there's causal connections inevitably between the graphs they suggest. So one way we get people to think outside the box, or another way I should say this, is inside the dynamics box. We want them to think dynamically. So we ask for graphs over time. We also do a lot with stakeholders, and we do a lot with, if you had a perfect model that would really help you think, what are the policies you'd want to simulate? And people tell us all sorts of really important things that also gets us to understand what they're thinking about. That's roughly it. There's other techniques that we use.
Okay, question down here.
George, really liked your talk, and it was particularly interested in the polio example. It was just tantalizing enough to provoke me to ask you for a little more information about how Kimberly actually got from her model to a decision. And was the model so convincing on its own that the World Health Organization and Gates Foundation were willing to go in the eradication direction, or did she have to do a lot of very sophisticated stakeholder management and persuasion, or what was it, or both?
She did both, and I think I keep walking away from this guy.
And we're almost at the time
Okay.
for our next speaker. So.
All right, so I should be quiet. She did both, and the number of people engaged in that research project borders on 40 to 50 folks under her, gathering people together and under her direction, and it's an international effort. And then the risk communication is a separate part. But as she says, she didn't walk into the World Health Organization and ran simulation models for them. She talked. And talking from 10 years worth of heavy-duty modeling and engaging of stakeholders was what did the trick.
Thank you very much. So please join with me in thanking George Richardson. Thank you.